Sri Lanka, a nation of 22 million inhabitants, has been facing turmoil. Protesters took to the streets and ousted the president, forcing him to resign and pushing the country to declare a state of emergency. The country has endured its worst financial crisis since gaining independence in 1948. If you're wondering, how did that happen? How did things got so bad? The answer is simple. Food inflation rose as much as 80%. More than 60% of Sri Lankans were already choosing to limit meals to stretch their food budget. In one dire example of the length, some vulnerable people need to go in order to eat. Some families travel nearly 10 kilometers on foot to get a free meal from a community kitchen in Colombo. When people have to borrow money to satisfy their basic needs, such as putting food on the table, you know that a crisis is on the horizon. Add to that fuel shortage where people had to wait in long queues to be able to fill their tanks and constant electricity cuts, things went from bad to worse. The country halted petrol sales except for essential services. The protesters stormed the president's home and the country defaulted on its foreign debts. The country's leaders are definitely responsible for mismanaging the crisis, but that's just one side of the coin. The other is, the world is on the brink of food and energy catastrophe, and if things continue the way they are now, Sri Lanka might just be one out of many countries that will collapse in the coming future. Russia and Ukraine supply almost a third of the global wheat, almost a third of barley, and 15% of maize and 70% of the sunflower oil. Take these supplies out of the market and you have hundreds of millions of starving people that are ready to storm presidential palaces. When there is nothing to put on the table, there is very little left to lose. Nearly a quarter on the brink of famine, and hundreds of millions more are driven into poverty, since now they have to spend a larger share of their income on food. Almost half of the cereals imported by Lebanon, Tunisia, and Egypt are from Ukraine. The problem is that over 90% of Ukrainian exports go through either the Odessa port or Mariupol. One is entirely in the hands of Russia, and the other is blocked by Russian ships that do not let Ukrainian ships pass. On top of that, the United States and its allies impose severe sanctions on Russia, which limits its ability to export its wheat and further creates a shortage in the market, driving higher food prices. Russia is also the world's largest exporter of fertilizers, but as a way to pressure the West, it suspended the export of fertilizers, which further created a shortage of wheat, which led to higher prices. That pushed many countries to ban the export of essential products such as wheat, which made the situation even worse. So, if you're wondering why inflation is rising, here is your answer. There is a global shortage of wheat, barley, and other basic necessities that are driving prices up worldwide, and not just in the United States. So, just because the Fed raised the rates, it doesn't mean inflation is going to come down. Only asset prices will most likely fall, for reasons we have explored in previous videos. After 10 years of asset inflation, the Fed finally put an end to that, but it can't do much with consumer prices. The global food prices didn't start with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China, the largest wheat producer, has said that after rain delays planting last year, this crop may be its worst year ever. Extreme temperatures in India, the world's second largest producer. A lack of rain threatens to sap yields in other breadbaskets, from America's wheat belt to the regions of France. The Horn of Africa is being ravaged by its worst drought in 4 decades. Add to that the disruption of global supply chain, and you have a recipe for a catastrophe. But things are not as bad as they could be, because Ukraine had already shipped much of last year's crop before the war, and Russia is still managing to sell its grain despite added costs and risks for shippers. So, what is the big deal? The most frightening fact is,
but winter is coming.
If the war is not going to stop by winter, Ukraine's next shipment is not going to leave the Ukrainian soil, and Russia won't hesitate to use wheat as a weapon to stop the West from supporting Ukraine and finally declaring victory on its so-called military operation. If it comes to that, food prices are going to soar, and 9.1% inflation will be remembered as the good old days. However, that is not the worst-case scenario. JP Morgan expects oil prices to cross the $380 threshold for the first time ever if Russia cuts its supplies. Russia produces almost 10.8 million barrels of oil a day, making it the third largest oil producer after the United States and Saudi Arabia, while it consumes just 3 million barrels. Theoretically, Russia can slash its oil production by over 7 million barrels just to push oil prices higher as a way to pressure the West to stop supporting Kiev. According to experts, if Russia cuts its daily supplies by just 3 million barrels, that would push crude prices to 190. That is almost double the price they are today. Well, the worst case scenario is a 5 million barrel slash per day, which could mean stratospheric $380 crude oil prices. Putin's government will already make more money this year than ever from high oil prices and can easily afford to slash production at the peak of winter. If the last few months have taught us something, then it is Russia is struggling and couldn't break away the Ukrainian resistance, and it's ready to use any weapon at its disposal to declare victory over Kiev. A $380 oil price will increase food prices to levels we have never seen before. Such high prices will significantly lower the demand, which will hurt business profits, which will lead to higher unemployment and a recession we have never seen in the past. Europe, which is the United States' largest trading partner, can easily slide into a recession the coming winter. While Europe is declaring that it will entirely get rid of Russian gas, practically speaking, that is way harder than many think. It doesn't have the infrastructure to do that. For the past decades, German factories got hooked on cheap Russian gas. While many European countries are cutting the Russian gas imports now, it will be much more difficult to do so a few months from now when the demand for gas will rise, when people begin heating their homes in winter. You can't simply import natural gas. You need the required infrastructure that takes years and billions of dollars to build to be able to import natural gas, which Europe most likely won't be able to solve by the coming winter. So, if Russia is going to use natural gas as a weapon in the coming winter, that could send Europe into a recession. And since EU is the United States' largest trading partner and second largest exporter of China, that will hit both the US and China's economy severely. The collapse of Sri Lanka is just the first stage of what's coming next if the world energy and food crisis aren't solved. While the world is about to face such a catastrophe, the Fed is preparing to raise the rates by another 0.75% to further lower the demand. It is really difficult to make any predictions at this point, because so much depends on the outcome of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But what is certain for sure is that if things will continue the way they are now, a recession or probably a stagflation is inevitable. That's it for today. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.